Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the U.S. Center. My name is Jenna Jaden. I work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I'll be your MC here today. If you haven't been to the U.S. Center before, you should know that it is a public diplomacy effort put on by the State Department, where we feature efforts both domestically and abroad that the U.S. is engaged in trying to combat and understand climate change. I'm happy to see everyone here in the audience today, and I'd also like to send a special shout out to our online audience who's watching us from around the world. And I'd also like to give a special hello to the viewing party in Jordan at Princess Sumaya University of Technology. And I'd like to acknowledge that Jordan was the first partner in the Middle East to join the Climate and Clean Air Coalition that we're talking about today. Today's talk is entitled Climate and Clean Air Coalition, U.S. Action on Short-Lived Pollutants. We're really happy to have Todd Stern here today. Todd Stern is a U.S. Special Envoy for Climate Change at the State Department. Mr. Stern plays a central role in developing U.S. international policy on climate and is the President's chief climate negotiator, representing the United States internationally at the ministerial level in all bilateral and multilateral negotiations regarding climate change. Mr. Stern also participates in the development of domestic climate and clean energy policy. And with that, I'll ask Mr. Stern to come up and give a few remarks.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here rather than in a negotiating room at the moment, so I get to have a few minutes off from that duty. So I'm very pleased to be talking about this particular issue, which is near and dear to my heart, and we worked hard to get this coalition up and running earlier in the year and in the year before that. So I'm pleased to be here. Yesterday, some of you may have attended our side event on domestic action by the United States to reduce CO2, which we all understand is the main event with respect to mitigation. And the President has done a great deal in the last 4 years, and we anticipate doing a lot more in the next 4 years. What we've done, what he's done so far has included really landmark standards with respect to the whole transportation sector, vehicles, in which efficiency vehicle standards are doubling from around 27 to 54 miles per gallon. Major fuel standards with respect to power plants, appliance standards, a very aggressive program through DOE, doubling our renewable energy in the U.S., et cetera. So a lot going on there. Today I want to talk about our efforts on another front, and that's with respect to short-lived climate pollutants, both at home and abroad. These are pollutants like methane, black carbon, HFCs, et cetera. Again, the key event, the main event is reduction of CO2, but reduction of SCLPs, short-lived climate pollutants, can make a big difference, particularly in reducing warming in the near term, because these are short-lived agents, and very important in sensitive places like the Arctic. If we were able to do everything, of course you can never do everything, but if we were able to do everything that could be done effectively with respect to these agents, we could have an enormous impact. We could reduce warming by 2050 by as much as 0.5 degrees centigrade, which is huge if you stop and think about it. We could prevent over 2 million premature deaths each year and avoid millions of tons of crop loss, all caused by these pollutants. There are many cost-effective solutions to produce these reductions, and some of them are being implemented, but many are not yet. And that's why we started working on creating this coalition a couple of years ago. In February of this year, Secretary Clinton launched our coalition, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition at the State Department, to scale up global efforts and to act as a catalytic effort to produce these reductions. In 9 months, we've grown from initial six countries to 26 partners, including several non-country partners like the World Bank, UNEP, and others. We've launched and are implementing initiatives with respect to all three of the main pollutants focused on the oil and gas sector, solid waste, and alternative technologies to HFCs. And we've established a science advisory panel of eminent experts to ensure that our work is based on the latest sound science. Secretary Clinton and our EPA Administrator Jackson have encouraged other partners to join. They've helped launch new initiatives, and they've spoken on these issues all around the world, from Stockholm to Rio and elsewhere. And EPA is providing a absolutely invaluable foundational support to the coalition. EPA is a real repository of expertise on these issues in the U.S. government and has been working on them in one way or another for many years now. So this is the effort that we're driving internationally. If anybody had asked me back in February what we were going to have accomplished this year and told me we were going to be gone, we will have gone from 6 to 26 partners. We will have somewhere between $15 and $20 million raised. We would have a secretariat in Paris run by UNEP and 6 or 7 important initiatives launched. I would have said you've got a deal. That's a great first year. So we are off to a very good start. There's a lot more that can be done, and there's a lot more that's going to get done. At home, we are also acting, from new air quality standards to phasing down HFCs to working with farms to harness methane. The U.S. is providing examples of both voluntary and regulatory action on the SLCP front. I am going to turn things over to my colleagues here to provide more details. We look forward to continuing to work both at home and abroad in this area. It's a genuine win-win opportunity, and we're going to be pursuing it aggressively as we go forward. I now actually do have to go back to those negotiating rooms, so I'm going to leave you in the good hands of my colleagues. Thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn this over to Maurice. Okay, thanks.
And now I'll provide you with a quick introduction for our next 3 speakers. First, we have David Turk. David is currently a counselor to Special Envoy Todd Stern. He is playing point for the U.S. government on the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and he also assists the Special Envoy on a variety of other climate-related issues. David has previously served in the White House and the National Security Staff, as well as a Deputy Assistant Secretary at the State Department. Then we have Maurice Lefranc. Maurice is a senior advisor on international climate change in the Office of Air and Radiation at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Lefranc has worked on a variety of climate change issues focusing on international climate policy, developing country issues, market-based mechanisms, and mitigation. He has been a member of the U.S. delegation to the UNFCCC negotiations for the past 16 years. And then finally, we have Bill Hohenstein. Mr. Hohenstein serves as the director of the Climate Change Program Office and is responsible for coordinating climate change research and program activities for the Department of Agriculture. The Climate Change Program Office provides coordination and policy development support for and serves as a focal point for support to the Secretary of Agriculture on climate change issues.
Effort where we partner up with industry to move an issue along, or is the most effective action taking a regulatory action? And at times we've moved from a voluntary effort, and it provides capacity, understanding as you move in toward a regulatory effort. We also have certain situations where part of an approach is voluntary, part is regulatory. And landfills in the U.S., landfills above a certain size are regulated. Landfills below a certain size aren't. We have a program working with industry, voluntary program, and addressing volatile organic compounds coming out of landfills, methane, and solutions, whether it's capping, flaring, or capturing and using for energy. As I said, we consider both the climate and the health, climate air quality benefits. We may first consider climate, then secondary air quality, or we would look the other way. Take an action to address air quality, but consider what the climate benefits that would come along with that. Under all of our regulations in particular, we are required to look at health impacts, we're required to look at economic impacts, and then look at benefits. And I think in a couple of the slides I'll mention that. So in every regulation we have to do a detailed cost-benefit analysis of the action for any of the forces. Lastly, before I get started, we do significant analysis. So for any regulation, as I said, we have to do significant analysis. But we also have an Office of Research and Development, which gets at some of the basic science. A lot of work being done right now on black carbon because there's a lot less known about black carbon and how it plays out in different sources and sectors, but also work in other places. I don't have a slide which gives you a website at the end, but I think anything that I'm talking about, or you could Google or just go to the EPA website and find, or we can talk about it in questions. So I'm going to go get started. So I'm going to walk through some examples. I'm not going to walk through everything that we do on any of these forces, but I'm going to highlight a few things, both first domestic, then I'll highlight two programs which started as domestic programs and have evolved out to international programs, and then I'll very briefly at the end talk about 4 of the initiatives that are under the Climate and Clean Air Coalition that we play a large part in. So back in 2009, Congress asked EPA to do a report and look at black carbon, so everything from looking at sources to looking at impacts to looking at costs to looking at benefits. We completed the report and just this past year, and there's a citation for where it's available. It might look silly that it says the first part of the report was to define black carbon, but it is an issue to understand, what part of black carbon is warming, what part is cooling, how does it play out technically. We looked again at the health and environmental benefits of looking at the science and see what it says there. And we looked at data not only domestically, although it was Congress asking for the report, we looked at data domestically and internationally. And we actually have pretty good data on inventory type data on black carbon from around the world. And we looked at 4 sources. You can see mobile, stationary, cooking and heating, and then biomass burning. And again, it looked, as I said before, we looked not only at the climate benefit, but health and environment, which we're required to do under Clean Air Act. So the key message is that you can get significant near-term climate benefits, and as Todd said, it goes hand in hand with still pursuing actively carbon dioxide. And again, we look not only at a climate benefit, but what are the additional health and other environmental benefits, the co-benefits, and they are large. They're very large, and it's something that when you're trying to pursue this internationally, in many cases, the health and the other environmental benefits are a much more convincing argument to move forward. And there are, again, the report shows that there are control technologies available in a number of places, and our emissions have been declining, and you'll see in some of the things I talk about perhaps reasons why. So I'm going to walk through just very quickly, and I'm not going to read everything on these slides, but we're required to revise the air quality standard for particulate matter, which brings in black carbon. There are significant health impacts from black carbon, fine particles coming from vehicles, smokestacks, and power plants. coarse particles, dust, ag operations, construction, etc. We have existing rules that have addressed particularly matter from diesel from vehicles and power plants and stationary diesel engines. And this is one place in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition that we haven't pursued the stationary diesel sources, but we've been approached by a number, particularly African countries, which have an astounding number of stationary gen sets in the country. So we've proposed to move our standard from 12 micrograms from 15 down to 12 or 13, and then retain the other. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. If you want further information, I'm happy to talk to you after and connect you. Again, heavy-duty vehicles. We have both a voluntary program. There's a diesel program where we provide, I think it's been up to $500 million to diesel, either individual operators or transportation companies to put on particulate filters or operational changes, et cetera. And we also now have a regulatory program where we're looking at emissions from semi-trucks to large pickup trucks and vans. This is the first phase. We're now thinking about what we would do with the second phase, as we did with the light-duty vehicle. You get benefits from CO2, but you have ambient concentrations that are of PM and ozone that are also reduced, which are important for health. Again, you can see the monetary benefits of 1.3 to 4.2 billion by 2030. And again, this is part of our regulation where we have to look at the benefits. And you can see the number of combined efforts are reducing by about 76 million metric tons of CO2. And again, health and environment benefits. We look at this program in combination with our voluntary program, looking at about a 96% reduction in black carbon emissions by 2030, which is significant, and transferring, as the coalition is moving for, transferring that experience, knowledge to developing countries is a really positive thing. On oil and gas, we have a new source performance standards and emission standards for hazardous pollutants that we are putting forward. And again, it's looking at volatile organic compounds, air toxics, methane as a co-benefit, and achieves a 95% reduction. And again, it's a bit, I think most of you understand the fracking and the hydraulic fracturing and controversy behind that issue. EPA has been brought into that by having to put forth these standards for oil and gas and measuring the methane from there. And again, you can see the methane reductions of 1.1 million to 1.7 million tons per year, and you see the CO2 equivalent. We also have a mandatory reporting program for facilities in the U.S. It covers, it's under Clean Air Act, it's mandatory. Facilities above a certain size have to report annually. It covers about 80 to 85% of the economy and our emissions. And it covers, you can see the sectors: oil and gas, landfills, coal mine, refineries, and industrial power plants, which would bring in most heavily methane, but would touch on the black carbon. So a couple other actions. EPA has standards in place, as I said, regulation for large landfills, which are volatile organic compounds, but also bring in methane as a co-benefit. We have companion to that. It's a program run one of our offices, which looks at a gas star program, which is oil and gas, a landfill methane outreach program, which is methane from landfills, coal mines, and then ag waste. And I mentioned two of them here. And you can see from our voluntary domestic programs, we would achieve somewhere around 71 million metric tons of CO2 we have achieved in 2010. Now, switching a bit to the HFCs and managing the refrigerant supply, we again combined regulatory and voluntary programs to look at climate-friendly alternatives. One of our programs is a significant new alternatives policy, the SNAP program, where you look at substitutes that would reduce reduce risk to health and environment in certain industrial sectors. And The sectors include refrigeration, air conditioning, foam, solvents, fire suppression, and aerosols. And we've reviewed, you can see 400 substitutes, and then look at new alternatives for ozone depleting substances and high GWP HFCs. We have other regulations which look at the intentional release of HFCs from refrigeration and air conditioning, and recovery from motor vehicles. And again, we have other voluntary partnerships, Green Chill program, which works with food retailers, etc. So I'm going to switch a bit now to programs that evolved out of our domestic voluntary programs and moved out into international technical assistance, capacity building, working on a project basis, bringing projects in developing countries sort of up to about the sort of through the pre-feasibility stages. And this is a program called the Global Methane Initiative. It used to be called the Methane to Markets Program. It's voluntary, multilateral partnership. It works with countries, works with industry, and it targets these 5 sectors. We brought in a couple just recently, but ag, coal mines, municipal solid waste, wastewater, and then oil and gas. And as you can see, we have 41 partner countries and the commission, and you can see the flags below. Again, we work heavily not only with countries, but bringing in industries, and have generated quite a few. Well, let's show you the next slide. So again, it's bringing in capacity, technical assistance, and so we support work at over 700 project sites, annual reductions of around 39 million metric tons CO2 in 2011, and it's not only just environment, but it's energy co-benefit. So it would be working with someone on a landfill to bring energy from the methane, if that's the case. And so the people with Global Methane Initiative always put their commercial message at the bottom. For the GMI Expo in Vancouver, you can go to the website at the bottom here to find out more, but it brings together partners and more so industry from around the world. The second sort of program that evolved from domestic to international is the SmartWay Program, which is, so it's a voluntary program working with freight companies, started in the US, and now we've worked outside of the US, and have 13 countries participating. We have Mexico. Canada has just recently adopted essentially the SmartWay brand for the US, so wholesale have moved what we're doing with our companies over to theirs. And you have other countries, I show them up here, which have taken the program design, not necessarily the branding or exactly all the elements, but the concept behind it. We've done work in the past and in continuing to support work, and you'll see when I talk about the work under the coalition, but working with partners, the bank, CAIAsia, to look at projects in China, and then there's a Green Freight Initiative in China. So I'm going to switch gears one more time and just very briefly mention 4 of the initiatives that are under the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and these are initiatives that we've worked closely with State Department on the sort of the development of the initiative, and now we're heavily into the implementation phase and then moving towards scaling up each of these initiatives. There are places where we've worked traditionally, we have expertise, we have partners. For example, building on a lot of the work that the Global Methane Initiative did, bringing that forward. So the first is the diesel and looking at heavy-duty vehicles, looking at reducing black carbon from heavy-duty vehicles. The approach is threefold. One is building on SmartWay, is looking at the freight transportation supply chain, bringing in green freight and SmartWay programs. The second is looking at urban areas, and it could be city-level activities, could be fleets, it could be standards put forward by cities. We've also considered looking at ports, and some of this work is being done with UNEP, in particular the last piece, which is looking at sulfur and fuels and vehicle emission standards, and it builds on the Partnership for Clean Fuels and Vehicles, which the US and others have been involved in. Second is oil and gas, and there are 2 people in the room who know way more about what's going on with this, and so I'll very quickly cover it, but again, it's looking at expanding what's been done in the voluntary market to look at near-term reductions of methane and black carbon from oil and gas operations. And I think I will defer some of this, and maybe Dave, who's here, will talk a bit more. But again, it's looking at high-level engagement, looking at the oil and gas methane emissions that can be reduced through a variety of means, and then there's a high-level Climate and Clean Air Coalition meeting later this week where there'll be some action taken to, again, reach out high-level, scaling up, and that's the challenge for what we're doing. It's not trying to drill down to lots of projects, but how do you scale up and make a big change through this coalition? Again, municipal solid waste, and there is a person here who knows way more about this initiative than I do. But again, it's looking at the city level and looking broadly about municipal solid waste. It's not one aspect, it's not landfills, it's not flaring, it's not capping, it's looking broadly. And again, it's looking at cities, capacity building, tools and resources, and communication outreach. And in the bottom, you'll see where this is the first tranche of cities that would be addressed here. And then last, HFCs, and there actually is somebody in the back of the room who is very involved in some of this work. But again, it's looking at cooperative activities with government and industry and stakeholders to look at climate-friendly alternatives in the HFC realm and change the trajectory of growth. HFC's projection is to grow greatly over time, and so if you can address them now, you can start bending that curve a bit. There was a Bangkok Technology Conference that kicked this work off, and we're looking at doing inventories in 5 to 8 countries, and then looking at case studies to move further on this, and then looking at barriers that hinder bringing in alternatives. I think that's where I am. Before I stop, I just wanted to recognize one person will speak, but another person in the audience. Dave Turk and Emily McGlynn, who's in the front row at State Department, have been instrumental in getting this moving. I think they both spend 28 hours a day on this thing, and if I counted up the number of emails I've got from them in the last year, I would, well, that I don't need to say more. But it's really a good effort, and EPA has been working really closely and has really enjoyed. And the challenge, as Dave might say, is how do you take things from a project level and scale up and make real change in these areas? So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Hohenstein. I'm the director of the Climate Change Program Office at the Department of Agriculture, and it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to talk about what USDA brings to the table. When people think of USDA, people immediately think of agriculture, but we're so much more. We're a research organization. Our department includes the Forest Service. Unlike some other governments, the forestry and agriculture are contained within one department within the United States. And we do a tremendous amount of work on rural development, working with rural communities and landowners and businesses in rural areas on everything from utilities and electricity, generation and distribution, to water systems, to housing. So our reach is broad, and we cover a lot of areas, and we get involved in a lot of different things, both domestically and internationally. When it comes to short-lived radiative forcing gases, our interests primarily are in the areas of methane and black carbon. And so I'm going to focus the discussion today on those two issues. First, methane. When you think of methane within USDA, you think of cows, primarily. Looking at the U.S. greenhouse gas inventory, roughly about 6% of U.S. emissions come from the agricultural sector. And that is split pretty much evenly between emissions of two gases, methane and nitrous oxide. And then again, looking at the source categories within agriculture, there is about a 50-50 split between emissions that come from cultivated lands that are in crop production and pasture, primarily nitrous oxide emissions, and emissions that come from the livestock sector, primarily emissions from Turk fermentation, which are entirely methane, and emissions from manure management, which are a combination of methane and nitrous oxide. But we're going to focus on methane today. So we have a lot of work going on within the department to address methane, from manure management systems, which is one of the areas where there are technologies that can improve conditions. We focus on the emissions that are associated with the storage and disposal of manure. In some production systems, the manure is land applied, where the animals are confined, or where there are too many animals for the area. The manure tends to be managed either in lagoons or in pits, where anaerobic conditions form and methane is the result. And so our efforts focus on improved manure management systems to reduce the emissions of methane, and not only methane, emissions of ammonia as well, and other gases. These technologies also have the benefit of improving water quality and other resource concern to USDA. And so the types of technologies, the one that gets the most attention is anaerobic digesters, basically fermenting the methane in a controlled condition to form, or the manure in a controlled condition to actually generate methane but capture it for use. But in addition, we're working on technologies that include separation systems, where you're separating liquid and solid waste, and aerobic systems like composting, and systems which are advanced nitrification, denitrification systems, where we're actually mining the manure for the nitrogen for fertilizer. And we think those technologies hold a lot of promise. We also think they have the benefit of reducing methane emissions. And Turk fermentation is the largest source of methane emissions in the agricultural sector. It's also one of the most difficult to control. These are emissions that are generated within the bovine system, within the cow, and are emitted directly. And the primary mechanism we have to reduce those emissions is to improve productivity. If we have fewer cows, if we have cows that are more efficient, that are taking in feed and putting it into product, whether it be meat or milk, then we have less waste and less methane emissions as a consequence. And so what we focus on are the quality of the feed. It turns out that there are some feed additives that can reduce methane generation within the animal. The use of rumensin and the adding fats to the diet can reduce methane generation. And then finally, we have breeding efforts going on to actually produce animals that result in less emissions. Finally, there are a whole series of crop practices, and rice is the primary one that generates methane emissions in the U.S. It's a relatively small crop within the U.S. It's limited geographically, but we're working on cultivation technologies. There's quite a bit of interest in the state of California. In fact, they're generating a protocol for quantifying methane emissions from rice and emission reductions that they can use in their offset system. Those technologies primarily deal with water management, how to make sure that the conditions in the rice paddies are not anaerobic and there's not methane generation. That includes basically dry land systems and assessing when there's flooding, and also reducing the amount of residue that's left on the farm when there is flooding. There are trade-offs. In fact, one of the issues that we're dealing with in the state of California is that these rice paddies are important wintering areas for migratory waterfowl. And so to the extent we're draining them in the winter and we're changing that habitat, it could potentially impact waterfowl. And so, as with any of these systems, there are certainly unintended consequences potentially, and things that we'll need to consider as we move forward toward implementation. The types of support that we can provide farmers, research is actually quite important. We have a broad research effort, and in fact, research on climate change within USDA has doubled in the last 4 years, something we're quite proud of. We're also playing a part in a new international research alliance, the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases. We were a founding member along with New Zealand. We now have over 30 international partners in a very robust effort focused on rice, cropping systems, livestock systems, and greenhouse gas accounting. What we've done within USDA is we've put within each of our scientists that are working in this area as part of their performance requirements that they participate in the GRA. And so the results that we have from our domestic research, our researchers are getting an incentive to participate in this international alliance and bring their research forward internationally. We're also doing that with our grantees as well. We do a lot of research. We fund a lot of research through the university system. When it comes to supporting farmers, we provide a lot of technical assistance. We have a history of providing extension, university-based extension. In fact, that system is a model for many other countries. It's been quite effective. We also work with technical service providers to provide support to farmers on conservation through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. We provide financial support for implementing conservation practices on the ground, working in partnership with the farmers through programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program and the Conservation Innovation Grants Program. And then finally, with regard to these methane digesters, because we generate energy as a byproduct of these systems, much of the funding comes through our renewable energy portfolio. And in fact, we have a whole series of programs across the department that can be used to finance or provide financial support, whether it be through loans or loan guarantees for the installation of anaerobic digesters. Now, what you see here is that we've funded over 200 of these digesters across the country. Depending on the program, and some of these programs basically target smaller operations and some much larger operations, you can see that it's not necessarily the number of projects that are implemented, but their size and their effectiveness. We think we've reduced methane emissions by about 2 million tons per year just through our efforts to promote digesters in the US. I'd like to turn now to black carbon and our efforts there, primarily focusing on our cooperative work with the government of Russia. Black carbon is a byproduct of open biomass burning, a significant issue in Russia. Our efforts focus on improving information, the models and data that are used within the Russian government, cooperating technically on how to manage wildfires in the forest systems and in agricultural burning, and to evaluate and assess options that are available to farmers in the region. We have extensive efforts underway working with the government of Russia to quantify the emissions of black carbon from fires, to map those emissions, because black carbon the issue is the transport of the black carbon to the Arctic, where it is deposited and changes the albedo. And so it's a fate and transport issue when it comes to black carbon. And we work on when the emissions occur and where they end up. So you can see there's extensive burning in Russia. This is a map of the fires that existed across the region in 2010. One of our project is to actually look at the potential for transport in the region, and so this is looking both temporally and geographically on where the conditions are most favorable for transport into the Arctic. And so the areas in red are more days where there are conditions that are favorable if there are fires for transport of black carbon into the Arctic. And you can see in some regions it's a problem year-round, in other regions it's a problem more in the spring and in the winter, and in some regions it's not as significant a problem. From that, we're developing a forecasting tool that can help the Russian government plan, both in terms of areas to target for emission reductions and with timing as well. technical cooperation is primarily done through two agencies. The Forest Service is working closely with forestry, government forestry agencies within Russia. We have pilot projects working with aerial tracking, and we're also working with their agricultural agencies to develop options for farmers to reduce black carbon. Biomass burning in agricultural systems in Russia is primarily done to reduce disease and pests. Believe it or not, ticks are a significant issue in farm fields in Russia, and burning can reduce tick populations. It's a source of encephalitis in Russia. And then it also frees up nutrients as well. And so those are the issues that we need to work with Russian farmers on and solve those problems so they can reduce burning. As I mentioned, our Forest Service is working with their Aerial Forest Fire Center, and our technical cooperation on the agricultural side is primarily exchange of scientists and working with them on outreach and communications. So why don't I stop there and turn things over to David? And are we now going to take questions? Or okay, great.
Thanks, Maurice and Bill. Really appreciate it. As you can see from the presentations, this short-lived climate pollutants is an area where you're only going to get success if a lot of people are working at it in partnership. And we got a couple good examples of the kinds of things from two agencies that we're doing on the domestic front in the United States. Internationally, as Todd said at the outset, we've got the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. That is a true partnership. Some of those partners are here in the audience. The partnership is growing every day. And what we'd like to do now is just take questions both with regard to what the United States is doing domestically on short-lived climate pollutants, and then certainly happy to answer any questions on the coalition as a whole as well on the international side.
Okay, yes, and we'll be taking questions both from online and live in the audience. And I'd like to give the live audience here an opportunity to start with the first question. So just raise your hand if you have one, and I'll get the microphone over to you.
We were way too clear for anybody to have to ask any questions. We were way too thorough.
I'm with the State Department. I'm Karen DeMars. I used to work in the Philippines, where the Philippines was partner in our global methane initiative, and I got a science fellow from USDA, Maurice, and she was trying to work on biodigesters that were affordable. This was in 2006, and we couldn't find any sources that were under $500,000. How affordable are biodigesters now, and how can developing countries use that technology?
Yeah, that may be more of a question for me. Yeah. Yeah. Although I'd be happy to let Maurice answer it.
We work together well.
What's interesting, and maybe not a well-known fact, the country that has more biodigesters than any is China. And they happen to be small, almost residential scale digesters. They're used to generate fuel for cooking, and they generally tend to be pretty low-tech operations. And so when you look at how digesters are applied globally, there are a lot of low-tech digesters where the issue isn't so much methane capture, but the leaking of methane from those systems. Digesters within the U.S. system tend to be large and pretty expensive operations. There's the digester component, and then there's also sort of the energy generation if you're combining it with an electric system, a generation system. And that is it is a barrier. The cost of these systems is a barrier. And as a consequence, we've tended to find that they're more feasible for pretty significantly sized operations. But when you think about globally, there are other systems out there that aren't widely used within the U.S. and may not be applicable to U.S. agriculture, but are being used in countries like Vietnam and China in the region. There are bag digesters that are sort of tubular systems. There are a lot of different systems out there.
Yeah, just to follow on, Bill, is that part of the Global Methane Initiative is to work at scale, and as Bill said, we have people from the Global Methane Initiative working in Vietnam on very small operations. So I think, you know, as Bill said, it's sort of a scale issue.
Okay, our second question is, I'm going to give a chance for someone online to ask a question, and that is, does CCAC assign specific countries to start its mission implementation, and will developing countries be last?
Thanks. I'll take that question and appreciate the interest. The CCAC is a voluntary international organization. It's countries, it's international organizations, it's non-governmental organizations, and certainly the private sector as well. Countries volunteer to participate in the coalition. We're now up to, as Todd mentioned at the outset, 26 countries and roughly 45 or so total partners, which is an incredible growth from where we started just this past February, where we had 6 country partners and 1 non-country partner. So if a country or an NGO or private sector is interested in participating, we can certainly provide information. There's also a website that's quite helpful and has more and more information all the time. That website is www.unep.org/CCAC. But certainly look on the website, ask other current CCAC partners. We've got a secretariat as well for more information on it. It currently consists of a whole range of countries across the world, developed countries, developing countries. We've got an incredibly good mix of countries, and it's a very action-oriented coalition focused on real-world results. This is a coalition where we all get together, we support each other. If we've got someone doing something good, like, you know, we've got some great examples from the U.S. of progress that we've made domestically, we try to share those examples, and other countries can benefit from that. Likewise, if Bangladesh is doing something terrific on rice parboiling, then those lessons can be learned and shared elsewhere. So it's a very supportive, action-oriented coalition.
Question here in front.
So thank you very much for very interesting and excellent presentations. My name is Masazumi Hirono from the Japan Gas Association in Tokyo. So now a number of developing countries' names were raised. So I'd like to know as to your idea or the possibility of taking these cooperation on the table of the multilateral frameworks, such as the APEC or something.
No, thanks for the question. I'll answer it, and Maurice, if you've got some thoughts on that front as well. Through the coalition, we're working globally. We're also working regionally. One of the more exciting things we've done this year is to have a series of regional workshops. We had one that Ghana hosted a couple months ago. Most recently, Colombia hosted one for the Latin American region, and there's actually one in the Asian region coming up in early next year, which is quite exciting. So we also, it's a coalition that is coming into this space recently, and there's a lot of other international organizations, bilateral relationships, all sorts of efforts related to these areas. And because this is both climate and clean air, it's the climate, it's the health, it's the agricultural productivity. So there's a lot of entities and efforts already existing. One of the things we're very conscious of from the coalition is how can we work with other international organizations? How can we work with others working in this area so that we don't reinvent the wheel, but we build up, we scale up, we help support efforts by others. There's a terrific effort that a lot of countries are part of, the Global Alliance on Clean Cook Stoves, for example, that is very much focused on black carbon and health benefits there. The Alliance is part of the coalition, and we're working to try to figure out what the coalition can do to add on to those efforts. So the particular organizations, the best thing to do is to contact the coalition and let's start a dialogue and figure out if there's something that can be done in that organization that's helpful. If there's some expertise among the coalition or its partners that's helpful to bring into another agency or entity, we can certainly do that as well.
Okay, I know there were a bunch of questions in back. We'll maybe take 2 at a time this time.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the presentations. And I have one question. My name is Nado Tadel. I'm from Ethiopia. In the investment program, it says there is an advanced biofuel programs. So what is the role of these advanced biofuel programs in the CCAC? And what kinds of biofuel can you use? Because there is ethanol and biodiesel. Which kinds of biofuel can use for this program? Thank you.
Okay, and we'll take one more.
Sorry, Jean Shemnick at Greenwire, and I was wondering if there are what the barriers are to banning HFCs in the Montreal Protocol at this point, and how much of a focus that is for the administration and the State Department at the moment.
No, thanks for both questions. Thanks for the question from our Ethiopian colleague here. It's incredibly exciting that Ethiopia just 2 days ago became a new partner of the coalition, and we're incredibly excited that Ethiopia is joining a lot of others in this effort. And we were just meeting actually earlier today with a colleague of yours from the Agriculture Department to see what we might be able to work on with Ethiopia in that segment. It's a new coalition, and so what we hope when new partners join the coalition, there's some new ideas about different sectors to work in the coalition to advance the objectives, whether it's biofuels or other things. The only criteria we have is it has to be short-lived climate pollutants. That's what the coalition's about. And it has to be something that we see an ability to scale up. We see an ability to have a big impact regionally on a particular country and globally to try to really reduce these short-lived climate pollutants as much as possible. So what we hope, whether it's Ethiopia or other country partners or other partners coming on, is bring your ideas, bring your technical expertise, bring your political capacity, diplomatic capacity. Let's talk, let's flesh out a particular idea, let's get an initiative up and running, let's get the ministers of the coalition to advance that through high-level political leveraging, and let's really get the ball rolling. This is a coalition that we really want to support ideas, support participation, support action. The question on the Montreal Protocol, it's not an area of expertise personally. What I do know there are two things. One, the U.S. is certainly very supportive of the Montreal Protocol amendment on HFCs. There is an enormous opportunity to make a difference, including on the climate front in terms of the HFC growth, potential growth, and the ability to try to keep that in check as much as we can. And the Montreal Protocol is a terrific avenue and a record of success there in terms of the gigatons of CO2 equivalent that have been avoided and the potential there. We do have an HFC initiative that's very complementary to some efforts going on in the Montreal Protocol in the coalition as well, in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, where we try to work with industry, phase down HFCs in a way that works for businesses, in a way that works for countries. We've got a technology forum coming up, our second one through the coalition later this month. That's quite exciting. This one focused on commercial refrigeration, but making a lot of tangible, again, on the ground progress action, which is what the coalition's all about. Maurice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the example is the same people wearing multiple hats. So the same people who are doing the domestic work on HFCs are the same people who are negotiating at the Montreal Protocol, both EPA people and State Department people, and taking the amendment proposal very seriously, trying every way possible to advance that, modifying it as needed, moving forward. I personally know all of them at EPA, and they work very diligently trying to push this. And at the same time, as Dave said, they're the people who are advancing this slightly smaller component within the coalition, which is working with industry and other stakeholders and country partners to move sort of forward on HFCs from a different angle, but it's to address the HFC problem as effectively as we possibly can.
Okay, next we have another question online, and that is, what kind of communication efforts around the issue of short-lived climate pollutants are you using to extend beyond government agencies?
No, it's a terrific question. I think there's a lot of communication opportunities on short-lived climate pollutants. It's not as recognized as widely as we certainly think it should be, given the climate benefits, as Todd stressed at the beginning, especially if you think about the short term. We can make some real climate benefits over that if we really focus and be aggressive on these short-lived climate pollutants. But you also have the health benefits, you have the agricultural productivity, a whole range of benefits for it. All, as Todd stressed, and this is incredibly key, and everybody in the coalition always stresses this, our focus on short-lived climate pollutants should in no way stop us from being incredibly aggressive on CO2. That is the main ball game on the climate change front, and we all need to keep very focused on it. Secretary Clinton, who I work for, always stresses you can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can be as aggressive on CO2 domestically, internationally, including here at the UNFCCC COP, but we also should, there's no reason we shouldn't also be aggressive on the short-lived climate pollutant piece. There is certainly a role for countries in terms of raising awareness. Secretary Clinton has done a number of events, Administrator Jackson as well from the US side, and coalition partners and ministers have done all sorts of events. Secretary Clinton was in Sweden over the summer, and she did a terrific event. The footage is still online with Minister Eck, the environment minister from Sweden, and really highlighting the awareness raising, but also the practical efforts that we're doing here. There's also an effort that we engaged in, and there's a video somewhere online which is just terrific. Hopefully it's on our website. We had a youth contest to try to make sure we tapped into the talents of young people who are so much better at messaging and so much better at communicating than the rest of us are. And we had a contest where we challenged the youth of the world to put their ideas forward, and a couple incredible students put together a video where they did some hand drawings highlighting and raising awareness on short-lived climate pollutants. I'm pretty sure it's on our website. Go check it out. It's really cool, but there's a lot of opportunities to raise awareness. Reese?
The other thing I want to say is I think sometimes the science has to move along before you can start communicating. So as I showed you in the US, the Black Carbon Report to Congress provides sort of a foundation to then communicate, and then you saw the UNEP report on short-lived climate forcers, and then the report on HFCs. And I think if you look at the literature and you start seeing the curve where you see papers and studies coming out, it's clearly on the upswing.
Okay, do we have a couple more questions from the audience?
Hey, it's 2:30. I'm done.
Hi, my name is Bhaskar Singh Karki from Isimot, Kathmandu, Nepal. We are coming from a place where there's a lot of mountain farmers, subsistence agriculture, labor-intensive agriculture. Now, I was looking at biochar, and there seems to be a dearth of information on biochar. Does the biochar research, is it also part of your scope of work, or is it not? I would like to know that. Thank you.
Sure. Well, certainly biochar is of significant interest to USDA. Biochar is a byproduct of biomass combustion in controlled systems. So biochar is produced through partial combustion of biomass. These systems produce energy, and they produce this essentially charcoal as a byproduct that can be used as a soil amendment. And it's been shown to improve productivity in soils, and the fact that it's inert means that it actually stays stored and sequestered in the soil for long periods of time. And significant amounts of biochar can be added to improve soil quality. And so there's research and some pretty large-scale pilots within the U.S. looking at sort of the long-term implications of biochar applications. And we think, this technology actually evolved or came from developing countries. I think it was initially used in Brazil. And so there are certainly developing country applications for biochar, both as a source of energy generation and as an agricultural productivity enhancer. When looking at agricultural systems in developing countries and the crosscut with methane, much of the emissions are going to be coming from livestock operations through and Turk fermentation. And the technologies that can improve productivity, improve yield, reduce waste are going to be the technologies that benefit farmers, but also ultimately reduce methane emissions. And so when we're thinking about the crosscut between the CCAC and agriculture in developing countries, the focus on livestock, but improving productivity of livestock operations is sort of where there's going to be a significant benefit.
Okay, and we have time for one more quick question if there's one. Okay, not seeing any. I'd like to ask for a final round of applause for our speakers. Also, thank you to our online audience and thank you to our live audience. A couple quick announcements. At 4 o'clock today, we have another talk sponsored by the Council on Environmental Quality about extreme events in the United States and lessons we've learned and how we're preparing for that. So drop in again if you're interested in that. And at 6 o'clock tonight at the U.S. Center, we have a really great event going on called Demo Alley, in which we're bringing in 7 climate change application technology developers who are going to give really quick little presentations of all of their apps. And then you kind of switch up and check out everyone's apps really quickly, followed by a reception afterwards. So if you're interested in coming to that, please talk to one of the center's staff and RSVP, and we can put you on the list. Thanks a lot.